The sound of Rory's heels clicking against our hardwood floor at 2 a.m. told me everything I needed to know. Those weren't the careful, considerate steps of a wife trying not to wake her husband. These were the confident, almost defiant clicks of someone who no longer cared about discretion. I lay in our bed, staring at the ceiling, listening to her fumble with keys that shouldn't have been necessary if she'd been where she claimed to be. The digital clock cast its green glow across the room. 2:17 a.m., her client dinner, had supposedly ended at 9. "Tanner?" Her voice drifted up the stairs, testing whether I was awake. I didn't answer. Let her wonder. The refrigerator door opened and closed. Ice clinked in a glass. Rory was buying time, probably crafting her story. After 12 years of marriage, I knew her patterns better than she realized. When she finally climbed the stairs, I caught the scent immediately. Not her usual perfume, but something masculine and expensive. The kind of cologne that screamed, "I drive a BMW and wear Italian suits." "You're awake," she said, not really a question. "Hard to sleep when your wife's out conducting business at strip clubs," I replied, keeping my voice level. She laughed, but it came out forced. "Don't be ridiculous. We were at Morrison's downtown. You know, the steakhouse where actual professionals eat. Morrison's closes at 11 on weekdays." The pause stretched long enough for me to count her heartbeats. "We went somewhere else afterward. For drinks. Somewhere that sells Armani cologne, apparently." Another pause. Longer this time. "I'm tired, Tanner. Can we not do this tonight?" She disappeared into the bathroom, and I heard the shower start, at 2:30 a.m., because nothing says innocent business dinner like scrubbing yourself clean in the middle of the night. I'd been suspicious for weeks, but tonight felt different. Tonight felt like confirmation. My phone buzzed on the nightstand. A text from my buddy Donnie. "Saw Rory's car at the Riverside condos again. Thought you should know." The Riverside condos, where Evan Keller lived. Evan Keller, her business partner at Prestige Design Solutions. Evan Keller, who drove that BMW I'd been smelling on my wife's clothes. Evan Keller, who'd made it clear at every company party that he thought Rory had married beneath her station. I set the phone down and closed my eyes, but sleep wasn't coming. Instead, my mind started working through possibilities, calculating angles, considering options. People always underestimate the quiet ones. They see my work clothes, my pickup truck, my preference for beer over wine, and they assume I'm simple. Even Rory had started treating me like I was too dense to notice her lies. But here's what they didn't know about Tanner Jossman. I'd put myself through community college studying business law before switching to IT. I understood contracts, documentation, and evidence. I knew how to research, how to organize information, and how to present a case. Most importantly, I knew how to be patient. The shower stopped. Rory emerged in her robe, hair wrapped in a towel, looking anywhere but at me. "Everything okay at work?" I asked conversationally. "Fine, just the usual client demands." "Evan handling his projects well?" Her shoulders tensed slightly. "He's professional." "Good to hear. Wouldn't want any complications affecting the business." She glanced at me then, trying to read my expression in the dim light. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing specific. Just that workplace relationships can get messy if people aren't careful." "There's nothing messy about our working relationship." "I'm sure there isn't." She climbed into bed, keeping to her side, and within minutes her breathing had evened out. Either she was an exceptional actress, or she genuinely believed I was too stupid to connect the dots. I stared at the ceiling until dawn, my mind cataloging every late night, every emergency meeting, every time she'd come home smelling like someone else's life. By morning, I'd made my decision. If Rory wanted to play games, I'd play along. But I'd be playing by my rules, not hers. The next few days passed normally on the surface. Rory left for work each morning with a kiss on my cheek and returned each evening with stories about difficult clients and demanding deadlines. She was careful not to mention Evan specifically, but his presence hung over every conversation like smoke. I went to my job at Tech Fix Solutions, repairing computers and networks for local businesses, and acted like nothing had changed. But during my lunch breaks, I started making phone calls. First, I called our bank. As a joint account holder, I had every right to request detailed statements going back 6 months. The customer service representative was helpful, even offering to highlight any unusual transaction patterns. "Are you looking for something specific, Mr. Jossman?" "Just want to understand our spending habits better. My wife handles most of the finances, but I'd like to be more involved." "That's very responsible of you. I'll have those statements mailed to your work address within 3 business days." Next, I visited our insurance agent. Again, perfectly legitimate. I was simply updating our policy information and wanted to review our coverage. "Has there been any change in your wife's commute or work schedule?" the agent asked. "Her mileage seems to have increased significantly over the past few months." "She's been taking on more clients. Lots of site visits." "Of course. Just wanted to make sure we had accurate information for the policy." I also stopped by the phone store. Our family plan was in my name, so requesting detailed call and text logs was straightforward. "Any particular reason for the request?" the clerk asked. "Thinking about switching plans. Want to see our actual usage patterns first." "Smart approach. These reports will show everything: calls, texts, data usage, even location information if that feature's enabled." It was enabled. By Friday, I had a clear picture forming. The bank statements showed regular charges at restaurants and hotels I'd never been to. The insurance data revealed trips across town that didn't match Rory's claimed schedule. The phone records painted the most detailed picture of all. Hours of calls and texts with Evan's number, often late at night or early in the morning. But I needed more than circumstantial evidence. I needed something undeniable. That's when I remembered the dash cam. 6 months ago, I'd installed a small camera in Rory's car after she'd been in a minor fender bender. She'd forgotten about it completely, but I'd been downloading the footage monthly as a backup. I spent Saturday afternoon reviewing 6 months of recordings, fast-forwarding through routine trips to work and the grocery store. Then I found what I was looking for. 3 weeks ago, Rory's car parked outside the Riverside condos for 4 hours on a Tuesday afternoon. 2 weeks ago, the same location, this time on a Thursday evening. Last week, multiple visits, including one that lasted from 7 p.m. until nearly midnight. The camera's audio was clear enough to pick up conversations when the windows were down. I heard Rory talking to someone on the phone, making plans, discussing when Tanner would be out of town for my quarterly business trip to Portland. I heard her laugh in a way she hadn't laughed with me in months. I heard her say Evan's name like a prayer, but the most damning evidence came from last Tuesday. Rory had left her phone connected to the car's Bluetooth system and forgotten to disconnect it when she got out. For 20 minutes, the dash cam recorded her conversation with Evan in his condo. I won't repeat everything they said, but the key phrase was clear enough. "He's so clueless. Tanner actually thinks I'm working late. It's almost sad how trusting he is." Almost sad. I sat in my garage workshop, staring at the computer screen, listening to my wife mock my trust. The woman I'd supported through college, helped build her business, stood by during every crisis and celebration. Almost sad. That's when the calm settled over me. Not anger, not hurt, but a cold, calculating clarity I hadn't felt since my college debate team days. If Rory thought I was clueless, I'd let her keep thinking that. If she wanted to play the game where she was the clever one and I was the fool, I'd play along. But I'd be playing to win. Monday morning arrived with the kind of gray October drizzle that makes everything look washed out and tired. Perfect weather for what I had planned. Rory left for work at her usual time, kissing my cheek with the same casual affection she'd shown for months. "Don't wait up tonight," she said. "We're presenting the Morrison Hotel redesign to the board. Could run late." "Good luck with that," I replied. not mentioning that I'd already confirmed Morrison Hotel's board only met on the first Tuesday of each month. After she left, I called in sick to work. First time I'd used a personal day for anything other than the flu, but my supervisor didn't question it. "Take care of yourself, Tanner. That bug's been going around." I spent the morning organizing my evidence into 3 categories: financial, communication, and timeline. Each piece of documentation went into labeled folders, cross-referenced and indexed like I was preparing for trial, because in a way, I was. Around noon, Donnie showed up at my house. I'd asked him to stop by during his lunch break, and he arrived in his work coveralls, smelling like motor oil and curiosity. "You sounded weird on the phone," he said, accepting the beer I offered. "What's going on?" Donnie McReynolds had been my friend since high school. He ran his own auto repair shop and had never been married, though not for lack of trying. Women liked him well enough, but his complete inability to lie or play games usually ended things before they got serious. "I need your help with something," I said. "But first, I need to know you can keep your mouth shut." "Depends what we're talking about." "Rory's having an affair." He set down his beer and leaned back in his chair. "I figured that might be coming. The condo thing wasn't exactly subtle." "You've been watching?" "Not watching, just noticing. Her car's been there a lot, and it's not exactly on her way to anywhere legitimate." I showed him the evidence I'd compiled. Donnie was smarter than most people gave him credit for, and he understood the implications immediately. "This is thorough," he said, flipping through the bank statements. "You planning to confront her?" "Eventually, but not yet." "What do you need from me?" "Information. You know half the business owners in town, and your shop is better than any gossip network. I need to know everything about Evan Keller that isn't public record." Donnie grinned. "Now that I can help with, give me a week." "What about discretion?" "Tanner, I've been keeping secrets since before you knew what secrets were. Trust me." After Donnie left, I drove across town to the law library. Most people didn't know the county maintained a public legal research facility, but I discovered it during my college years. The librarian, Mrs. Patterson, remembered me from my previous visits. "Haven't seen you in a while, Tanner. Still fighting the good fight?" "Something like that. I need to research Maine divorce law, specifically property division and asset disclosure requirements. Academic interest or practical application? Let's call it continuing education." She directed me to the family law section and provided access to the legal database. For the next 4 hours, I immersed myself in statutes, case precedents, and procedural requirements. Maine was an equitable distribution state, meaning marital assets were divided fairly, but not necessarily equally. The key factors included length of marriage, each spouse's contribution to the marriage, and any misconduct that affected the marital estate. Adultery, while not grounds for punitive damages, could influence asset division if it involved marital funds or property. More importantly, I learned about discovery obligations. Both parties in a divorce were required to provide complete financial disclosure under oath. False statements during discovery could result in sanctions, including adverse judgments. I took detailed notes, focusing on specific statutes and case citations. By the time I left the library, I had a clear understanding of my legal options. That evening, Rory came home at 11:30 p.m., claiming the presentation had gone well, but the board had asked for extensive revisions. "How extensive?" I asked. "Complete redesign of the lobby concept. Evan thinks we can turn it around in a week if we put in the hours." "Evan's optimistic. He's dedicated to the project." "I'm sure he is." She looked at me sharply, but I kept my expression neutral. "What's that supposed to mean?" "Nothing. Just that dedication is admirable in a business partner." "You've been acting strange lately." "Have I? I hadn't noticed." "There's something different about you. I can't put my finger on it." I shrugged. "Maybe you're just paying closer attention." The next morning, I implemented phase 2 of my plan. I called Prestige Design Solutions and asked to speak with the receptionist about scheduling a consultation. I'm interested in having some work done on my home office, I explained. A friend recommended your firm. Wonderful. Let me check our schedule. Would you prefer to work with Rory or Evan? Actually, I was hoping to avoid Rory if possible. It's meant to be a surprise for my wife. Of course. Evan has an opening Thursday afternoon. Would 2 p.m. work? Perfect. Thursday arrived with unseasonable warmth, the kind of Indian summer day that makes you forget winter's coming. I dressed carefully, khakis, button-down shirt, and a sport coat I rarely wore. Professional, but not overdressed. Prestige Design Solutions occupied the second floor of a renovated brick building downtown. The office was all glass and chrome, designed to impress clients with money to spend. Evan Keller looked exactly like I'd expected. Tall, well-groomed, and expensive. His handshake was firm but brief, the kind of gesture that said he was doing me a favor by taking the meeting. Mr. Jossman, isn't it? And you're interested in office renovation? That's right. My wife's been after me to upgrade my home workspace. Smart woman. A well-designed environment can significantly impact productivity. He led me to a conference room where we discussed my fictional project for 20 minutes. Evan was smooth, professional, and completely convinced of his own superiority. He name-dropped previous clients, mentioned his design awards, and subtly implied that most people couldn't afford his services. Of course, a project like this would require significant investment, he said. We typically work with clients who understand that quality design isn't inexpensive. Money's not really a concern, I replied. I just want the best result. His eyes lit up. Excellent. In that case, I think we can create something truly special. I'm curious about your process. Do you handle everything personally, or do you work with partners? I collaborate with my business partner when the project warrants it, but I maintain direct oversight of all client relationships. Your partner being Rory Jossman? That's correct. Do you know Rory? We've met. She seems very dedicated to her work. Extremely. Rory puts in more hours than anyone I know. She's here early, stays late, weekends when necessary. Complete professional. That's impressive. Not many people have that kind of commitment. It's one of her best qualities. I nodded thoughtfully. And I imagine you two work closely together on most projects? Very closely. We've developed an excellent working relationship over the years. I can imagine. Something in my tone must have caught his attention, because he paused and studied my face more carefully. Have we met before, Mr. Jossman? You seem familiar. I don't think so. I'd remember. Jossman. That name rings a bell. It's not uncommon, but I could see the wheels turning in his head. He was starting to make connections, and his confidence was wavering slightly. You know what? I said, standing up. Let me discuss this with my wife before we move forward. She'll want input on the design direction. Of course. Should I prepare a preliminary proposal? Not yet. I'll be in touch. I left him sitting in the conference room, and I knew he'd be on the phone with Rory within minutes of my departure. Sure enough, when I got home that evening, Rory was waiting for me with questions. Did you meet with a designer today? Thinking about it. Why? Someone came by Evan's office asking about renovations. The name sounded familiar. Probably a coincidence. He said his wife wanted input on the design. Makes sense. Most wives would. She stared at me for a long moment, and I could practically hear her trying to decide whether I was playing dumb or actually was dumb. Tanner, if you're planning some kind of surprise renovation, you should know I'm happy with the office the way it is. Good to know. And if you're thinking about hiring my firm, that could create complications. What kind of complications? Professional boundaries. It might be better to work with someone else. You're probably right. Before we dive deeper into this story, I have one small request. Please subscribe, drop a like, comment, and hit that hype button to boost this channel so more people can discover these incredible Reddit stories. The relief on her face was almost comical. She thought she'd successfully steered me away from discovering her relationship with Evan. What she didn't realize was that I'd already discovered everything I needed to know. The following week brought the first real cold snap of the season, and with it, an opportunity I hadn't expected. Donnie called me Friday morning with information about Evan that was better than I'd hoped for. "Your boy's got some interesting financial habits," he said. "Remember Tommy Chen, who does bookkeeping for half the small businesses in town? Turns out Prestige Design has been struggling lately. Lost 2 major clients over the summer, and Evan's been pushing for expansion they can't afford." "How does Tommy know this?" "His girlfriend works at First National. She processes their business loan applications. They've been turned down twice in the past 6 months." "Interesting." "Gets better. Evan drives that BMW, right? Tommy says it's leased and he's behind on payments. Same with the condo. Guy's living way beyond his means." "What about Rory?" "That's where it gets complicated. Word is she's been covering some of the business expenses with personal funds, which explains why she'd need access to your joint accounts." I felt pieces clicking into place. "Anything else?" "One more thing. Evan's got a reputation for mixing business with pleasure, if you know what I mean. This isn't his first workplace relationship. Previous partners didn't appreciate that. Previous partner filed a harassment complaint. Nothing came of it legally, but it's why he left his last firm." After hanging up with Donnie, I sat in my truck outside the coffee shop where we'd met, thinking through implications. Rory wasn't just having an affair, she was financially supporting it. Our money was subsidizing her relationship with a man who had a history of inappropriate workplace behavior. That afternoon, I made a decision that would accelerate everything. I called Rory at work. "Hey, it's me. Are you free for lunch tomorrow?" "Tomorrow's Saturday." "I know, I thought we could go somewhere nice. We haven't done that in a while." Actually, I was planning to work tomorrow. We have deadlines." "On Saturday?" "Evan thinks we can finish the Morrison project if we put in a full day." "Just the 2 of you?" "The office is quieter on weekends, fewer distractions." "Right. Well, maybe Sunday then." "Maybe." I hung up knowing exactly what I was going to do Saturday afternoon. The next morning, I drove to the electronics store and purchased a small digital recorder, the kind lawyers use for depositions. Then I stopped by the hardware store for a few items that would come in handy later. At 2 p.m., I parked across the street from Prestige Design Solutions and settled in to wait. Rory's car was in the lot, along with Evan's BMW. At 2:30, they emerged from the building together. Rory was laughing at something Evan had said, and he had his hand on her lower back in a gesture that was definitely not professional. They got into his car and drove toward downtown. I followed at a distance, staying back far enough to avoid detection, but close enough to see where they went. They parked outside Meridian, the most expensive restaurant in town. The kind of place that required reservations and charged $40 for an entree. I parked where I could watch the entrance and called the restaurant. "Good afternoon, Meridian. How may I help you?" "I'm supposed to meet friends for dinner tonight, but I can't remember what time they made the reservation. The name would be Keller." "Let me check. Yes, Mr. Keller has a reservation for 2 at 7 p.m. this evening." "Perfect. Thank you." So they were planning to make a day of it. Lunch, then back to the office, then dinner. I drove home and spent the afternoon preparing. First, I organized all my evidence into a comprehensive timeline: bank statements, phone records, dashcam footage, and witness observations. Everything dated, indexed, and cross-referenced. Then I drafted a letter to our joint credit card companies requesting detailed statements for the past year and noting that I was reviewing charges for potential fraud. Finally, I prepared what I privately called the nuclear option. At 6 p.m., I drove back to Prestige Design Solutions. Both cars were there, and lights were on in the second-floor office. I parked in the alley behind the building and used the emergency exit I'd noticed during my previous visit. The door was supposed to be locked, but the latch was broken, a violation of building codes that the landlord apparently hadn't addressed. I climbed the back stairs quietly and found myself in a hallway that led to the main office. Through the glass doors, I could see Rory and Evan in the conference room, but they weren't working on any project. They were wrapped around each other like teenagers, and Rory was wearing a dress I'd never seen before. I turned on the digital recorder and held it near the door. The sound quality wasn't perfect, but it was clear enough to capture their conversation when they finally separated. "We should go," Rory said. "The reservation's in 20 minutes. "We have time," Evan replied. "Besides, I like having you all to myself." Tanner's starting to ask questions. I think he might be getting suspicious. "What kind of questions?" "He asked about you specifically. And someone came by here last week asking about renovations. The description sounded like him." "You think he's checking up on you?" "I think he's not as clueless as we assumed." Evan laughed. "Come on, Rory. The guy fixes computers for a living. What's he going to do, hack our emails?" "Don't underestimate him. Tanner's smarter than he looks. If he was that smart, he would have figured this out months ago." "Maybe. Look, even if he suspects something, what's his move? He can't afford a good lawyer, and you handle all the finances. By the time he gets his act together, we'll be ready to make this official." "You mean that?" "I mean it. After the Morrison project pays out, we'll have enough capital to restructure the business. You can file for divorce, and we can start fresh." "What about the house?" "Sell it. Use your half to buy into the business officially. We'll be partners in every sense." "And Tanner?" "Tanner can go back to fixing computers and find himself a nice, simple girl who appreciates his simple life." I'd heard enough. I slipped back down the hallway and exited through the emergency door, my recorder full of evidence that would change everything. But I wasn't done yet. I drove to the Riverside condos and parked outside Evan's building. Using the skills I'd learned from years of troubleshooting network problems, I located the cable junction box that served his unit. Inside the box, I installed a small device I'd built from components purchased at the electronics store. Nothing illegal, just a signal amplifier that would cause intermittent connectivity problems, the kind of issues that would be frustrating but not immediately traceable. Then I waited. At 10:30 p.m., Evan's BMW pulled into the parking lot. I watched from across the street as he and Rory got out, both slightly unsteady from what had obviously been an expensive bottle of wine with dinner. They were so focused on each other that they never noticed the figure sitting in the dark pickup truck, documenting their every move. Sunday morning, Rory slept late and woke up with what she claimed was a headache. "Too much wine last night," she said, avoiding eye contact. "I thought you were working." We finished early and decided to grab dinner. The team, to celebrate completing the project. "That's nice. Where did you go?" "Just a little place downtown, nothing special." I nodded sympathetically. "Headaches are rough. Maybe some fresh air would help. Want to take a walk?" "I think I'll just rest today." "Sure. I'll probably work in the garage. Got some projects to catch up on." I spent Sunday afternoon in my workshop, not working on projects but planning the endgame. Everything was in place except for one final element. Monday morning, I called the law office of Patricia Hendricks. I'd researched family law attorneys in the area, and Patricia had a reputation for being thorough, aggressive, and expensive. "I'd like to schedule a consultation regarding a potential divorce case," I told her secretary. "Certainly. Mrs. Hendricks has an opening Wednesday at 3 p.m. "Perfect. And I should mention, this case involves significant financial complications and potential fraud issues." "I'll make a note. Mrs. Hendricks specializes in complex asset cases." "Excellent." Wednesday afternoon, I sat in Patricia Hendricks's office with my carefully organized evidence spread across her conference table. She reviewed everything methodically, occasionally asking questions or making notes. "This is very thorough," she said finally. "You've documented a clear pattern of deception and financial misconduct." "What are my options?" "Several. We can file for divorce on grounds of adultery and seek an unequal distribution of assets based on your wife's misuse of marital funds. We can also request temporary restraining orders on all joint accounts to prevent further unauthorized expenditures. How long would that take? We could file tomorrow if you're ready to proceed. What about cost? My retainer is $5,000 with additional fees based on complexity and duration. I pulled out an envelope containing exactly $5,000 in cash. I'm ready to proceed. Patricia raised an eyebrow. Most clients pay by check. I prefer to keep things simple. Very well. I'll prepare the paperwork tonight and file first thing tomorrow morning. There's one more thing, I said. I want to represent myself in court. Mr. Jossman, I appreciate your confidence, but family law can be extremely complex. I understand, but I want to handle the courtroom presentation personally. May I ask why? Because I want to look Rory in the eye when her world falls apart. Patricia studied me for a moment, then nodded. I can prepare the documentation and provide guidance, but you'll be responsible for the actual court presentation. That's exactly what I want. Thursday morning, Rory left for work with her usual casual kiss and promised to call if she'd be late. Have a good day, I said. You too. At 10 a.m., a process server knocked on her office door and handed her divorce papers that would freeze every joint account we owned and compel her to appear in court the following Monday. I spent the rest of the week preparing for the performance of my lifetime. Monday morning dawned clear and cold, the kind of November day that makes you grateful for heated buildings and hot coffee. I dressed carefully in my only suit, navy blue, purchased for our wedding 12 years ago and worn maybe 6 times since. The courthouse was the imposing brick building that had been serving Cumberland County since the 1920s. I arrived 30 minutes early and spent the time reviewing my notes and organizing my evidence into the exact order I'd need for presentation. At 9:45, Rory arrived with her attorney, Michael Brennan, and Evan Keller trailing behind like a well-dressed shadow. Brennan was everything I'd expected: expensive suit, confident stride, and the kind of practiced smile that probably cost $300 an hour. Rory looked nervous but determined. She'd chosen a conservative gray dress and minimal jewelry, clearly going for the wronged wife appearance. When she saw me sitting alone at the defendant's table, she whispered something to Brennan, who glanced in my direction and smirked. All rise for the Honorable Judge Margaret Whitcomb. Judge Whitcomb was a woman in her early 60s with steel gray hair and the kind of sharp eyes that suggested she'd heard every lie, excuse, and sob story the legal system could produce. She reviewed the case file briefly before looking up. This is a petition for divorce filed by Tanner Jossman against Rory Jossman, with requests for asset division and financial remediation. Mr. Brennan, you're representing the defendant? That's correct, Your Honor. And Mr. Jossman, I see you're representing yourself. Yes, Your Honor. Judge Whitcomb's expression didn't change, but I caught a slight tightening around her eyes. Mr. Jossman, you understand that family law is complex, and that you'll be held to the same standards as any attorney in this courtroom? I do, Your Honor. Very well. Mr. Brennan, please present your client's position. Brennan stood and launched into what was clearly a well-rehearsed presentation. Rory was a successful businesswoman who had contributed significantly to the marriage both financially and emotionally. The divorce was unfortunate but amicable, and she was prepared to accept a fair division of assets according to Maine state guidelines. My client has always been transparent about her finances, Brennan continued, and she's prepared to provide complete documentation of all marital assets and debts. We believe a 50-50 division is appropriate and fair. Thank you, Mr. Brennan. Mr. Jossman? I stood slowly, picking up a single folder from my table. The courtroom was quiet except for the soft hum of the heating system and the scratch of the court reporter's pen. Rory was watching me with barely concealed amusement. I could see her whispering to Brennan, probably something about how I was too poor to afford proper representation. Your Honor, I began, I am invoking statutory reimbursement for documented marital expenditures misrepresented during discovery pursuant to Maine Revised Statutes, Title 19A, Section 953. The smirk disappeared from Brennan's face. I would like to submit my exhibit list for the court's review. I handed the bailiff a bound document that I'd spent weeks preparing. Judge Whitcomb accepted it and began reading, her eyebrows climbing higher with each page. Mr. Jossman, this is quite extensive. You're alleging financial misconduct? Yes, Your Honor. I have indexed payments, sworn affidavits from financial institutions, and certified timelines, each cross-referenced to the defendant's own filings and statements. Rory leaned forward to whisper urgently to Brennan, but he was staring at me like I'd just grown a second head. Your Honor, Brennan interjected, we haven't had an opportunity to review this evidence. I'd like to request a continuance to examine these documents. Mr. Brennan, discovery closed 2 weeks ago. Your client had ample opportunity to provide accurate financial disclosure at that time. But, Your Honor, Mr. Jossman, please continue. I opened my folder and removed the first exhibit. Your Honor, I'd like to direct the court's attention to Exhibit A, which documents $23,000 in charges to joint credit accounts over the past 8 months. These charges were categorized by the defendant as business expenses in her financial affidavit. I handed copies to the bailiff, who distributed them to the judge and opposing counsel. However, as shown in Exhibit B, these charges were made at restaurants, hotels, and retail establishments that have no connection to Prestige Design Solutions' legitimate business operations. Rory tried to interrupt. Your Honor, I can explain. Mrs. Jossman, you'll have an opportunity to respond. Please continue, Mr. Jossman. Furthermore, Your Honor, Exhibit C demonstrates that these expenditures coincide exactly with documented meetings between the defendant and her business partner, Evan Keller, as verified by cellular location data, restaurant reservations, and photographic evidence. I produced a timeline that showed Rory's location, credit card usage, and phone activity for every questionable expense. The pattern was undeniable. Judge Whitcomb studied the documents carefully. Mr. Brennan, how does your client explain these discrepancies? Brennan was frantically shuffling through papers, clearly unprepared for this level of documentation. Your Honor, business entertainment is a legitimate expense. Mr. Brennan, these charges include a weekend at the Samoset Resort, dinner at restaurants in Portland when no business meetings were scheduled, and purchases at Victoria's Secret. Please explain how these constitute legitimate business expenses. The courtroom was silent. I could hear Rory's breathing from across the room. Your Honor, I continued, I'd also like to submit Exhibit D, which is an audio recording made in a public place, documenting the defendant's acknowledgement of her extramarital relationship and her plans to use marital assets to finance a new business venture with Mr. Keller. Brennan shot to his feet. Objection! That recording was made without consent. Your Honor, I replied calmly, Maine is a one-party consent state. As the husband of the defendant, I had legal standing to document conversations that directly affected my financial interests. Judge Whitcomb nodded. The objection is overruled. Mr. Jossman, please play the recording. I activated the digital recorder, and Rory's voice filled the courtroom. After the Morrison project pays out, we'll have enough capital to restructure the business. You can file for divorce, and we can start fresh. Then Evan's voice, sell it. Use your half to buy into the business officially. We'll be partners in every sense. The silence that followed was deafening. Rory had gone pale, and Evan was staring at his shoes. Your Honor, I said, this recording clearly demonstrates that the defendant has been systematically misappropriating marital funds to support her extramarital relationship, with the explicit intention of using divorce proceedings to transfer marital assets to her paramour. Judge Whitcomb set down the documents and fixed Rory with a stare that could have frozen water. Mrs. Jossman, do you dispute the authenticity of this evidence? Rory looked at Brennan desperately, but he was studying his legal pad like it contained the secrets of the universe. Your Honor, the situation is complicated. Mrs. Jossman, yes or no? Do you dispute that you made the statements on this recording? No, but do you dispute that you charged $23,000 in personal expenses to joint marital accounts? They weren't all personal. Mrs. Jossman, please answer the question directly. Rory's composure finally cracked. Fine. Yes, I spent the money. Yes, I'm seeing Evan. But Tanner doesn't understand what it's like to have ambition, to want something more than fixing computers and drinking beer. The outburst hung in the air like smoke. Brennan looked like he wanted to crawl under his table. Your Honor, I said quietly, I request that the court compel clarification under oath regarding all financial transactions over the past 2 years, pursuant to Maine Revised Statutes Title 19A, Section 906, Subsection 3. Judge Whitcomb consulted her notes. Mr. Jossman, are you prepared to submit a corrected asset ledger for the court's consideration? Yes, Your Honor, based on documented evidence and verified financial records. I handed over a comprehensive spreadsheet that I'd spent weeks preparing. It showed every joint asset, every questionable expense, and a proposed division that accounted for Rory's misappropriation of funds. Judge Whitcomb reviewed the ledger carefully, occasionally cross-referencing it with the evidence I'd provided. Mr. Brennan, does your client wish to contest these calculations? Brennan had finally found his voice. Your Honor, we request time to review this information and prepare a response. Mr. Brennan, your client has had months to provide accurate financial disclosure. The evidence presented by Mr. Jossman suggests that she deliberately misrepresented her expenditures and intentions. But, Your Honor, I'm going to enter the corrected ledger into the record and reset the asset valuation accordingly. Furthermore, I'm issuing a warning against false declarations in future proceedings. She turned to Rory, who was now crying quietly. Mrs. Jossman, you are reminded that providing false information under oath is perjury, which carries criminal penalties. Do you understand? Yes, Your Honor. Mr. Jossman, please approach the bench. I walked forward, maintaining the calm demeanor I'd practiced for weeks. Mr. Jossman, this is some of the most thorough documentation I've seen in family court. You've clearly invested significant time and effort in preparing this case. Thank you, Your Honor. However, I want to be clear that while the court recognizes your wife's financial misconduct, divorce proceedings are not criminal trials. The goal is fair resolution, not punishment. I understand, Your Honor. I'm simply seeking equitable distribution based on accurate information. Very well. Based on the evidence presented, I'm awarding you 65% of marital assets, with Mrs. Jossman receiving 35%. She will also be responsible for all debts incurred through the misappropriated expenditures. I nodded. Thank you, Your Honor. Court is adjourned. I packed my papers methodically while chaos erupted at the other table. Rory was sobbing, Brennan was frantically making notes, and Evan was nowhere to be seen. As I walked toward the exit, Rory grabbed my arm. Tanner, please. We can work this out. You don't understand. I looked down at her hand on my sleeve, then met her eyes. I understand perfectly, Rory. I understand that you thought I was too stupid to notice. I understand that you thought I was too poor to fight back. I understand that you spent months planning to take half of everything I've worked for and give it to your boyfriend. It wasn't like that. I understand that you were wrong about all of it. I gently removed her hand from my arm and walked out of the courthouse into the crisp November air. 3 weeks later, I sat in my newly quiet house, sorting through the final paperwork from the divorce settlement. The silence was different now. Not the tense quiet of secrets and lies, but the peaceful silence of a man who no longer had to wonder what his wife was really doing when she claimed to be working late. The house felt bigger somehow, even though nothing had physically changed. Rory had taken her clothes, her books, and the few pieces of furniture that had been hers before our marriage. Everything else remained exactly where it had been, but without the weight of deception hanging over it. Donnie stopped by that afternoon with a six-pack and an update on the local gossip network. "You've become something of a legend," he said, settling into his usual chair at my kitchen table. "Half the town's talking about how you took down the golden couple of interior design." I didn't take anyone down. I just presented facts. Facts that cost Evan his business partnership and his fancy condo. I raised an eyebrow. What happened to Evan? Turns out when you can't pay your bills, landlords get unsympathetic real fast. He's moved back in with his mother in Lewiston. Rory's been trying to keep the design business going solo, but word is she's lost most of their clients. "That's unfortunate," Donnie grinned. "You don't sound particularly broken up about it." "I'm not vindictive, Donnie. I just wanted what was fair." "Fair, right." He took a long drink of his beer. "So, what's next for the legendary Tanner Jossman?" I'd been thinking about that question for weeks. The divorce settlement had left me financially secure, more secure than I'd been in years, actually. Without Rory's expensive tastes and secret expenditures, my modest income was more than sufficient for my actual needs. "I'm thinking about going back to school," I said, "finishing that law degree I started." "Seriously?" "Seriously. Turns out I'm pretty good at legal research and case preparation." "Patricia Hendricks offer you a job?" "She mentioned that her firm could use someone with technical skills and legal knowledge. Apparently, there's a growing field called litigation support. You'd be good at that." "I think I would." We sat in comfortable silence for a while, drinking beer and watching the sun set through my kitchen window. It was the kind of peaceful evening I hadn't experienced in months. "Can I ask you something?" Donnie said eventually. "Sure." "When did you know? I mean, really know, not just suspect?" I considered the question. "The night she came home smelling like his cologne. Everything before that was just pieces that didn't fit together. But that night, I knew." "And you planned this whole thing from then?" "Not the whole thing. I planned to gather evidence and protect myself financially. The courtroom drama was just presentation. Hell of a presentation. I learned a long time ago that people underestimate quiet guys. They assume we're passive, that we'll just accept whatever happens to us. But you're not passive." "No, I'm patient. There's a difference." Donnie finished his beer and stood to leave. "Well, for what it's worth, I think you handled it perfectly. Rory and Evan got exactly what they deserved." After he left, I walked through the house, really looking at it for the first time in months. It was a good house, solid construction, character details, room to grow. Rory had always complained that it wasn't modern enough, wasn't impressive enough for her colleagues and clients. But it was mine now, completely and legally mine. And it was exactly what I wanted. My phone rang around 8 o'clock. I almost didn't answer when I saw the number, but curiosity won. "Hello, Tanner." "Hello, Rory. I wanted to talk to you. About everything." "There's nothing to talk about. Please, just 5 minutes." Against my better judgment, I agreed to meet her at the coffee shop downtown. She was already there when I arrived, sitting at a corner table and looking smaller than I remembered. "Thank you for coming," she said as I sat down. "You have 5 minutes. I want you to know that I never meant for things to go as far as they did." I didn't respond. It started as just friendship. Someone who understood my ambitions, my goals for the business. Rory. I know how it looked. I know what the evidence showed. But it wasn't as calculated as you made it seem in court. You recorded yourself discussing how to use divorce proceedings to steal half my assets and give them to your boyfriend. How is that not calculated? She flinched. We were just talking, planning for possibilities. You spent $23,000 of our money on your affair. It wasn't all... Rory, stop. Just stop. She looked at me with tears in her eyes. and for a moment I almost felt sorry for her. Almost. "I loved you," she said quietly. "No, you didn't. You loved the security I provided while you figured out what you really wanted. And when you found it, you decided to take half of everything with you. That's not fair." "Fair? You want to talk about fair?" I leaned forward. "Fair would have been telling me you were unhappy and wanted a divorce. Fair would have been dividing our assets honestly. Fair would have been not spending months lying to my face while you planned your exit strategy. I was scared. You were greedy. There's a difference." I stood to leave, but she grabbed my hand. "Tanner, please. I know I made mistakes, but we had 12 good years together. That has to count for something." I looked down at her hand holding mine, remembering all the times she'd held it with genuine affection. Before the lies, before Evan, before everything went wrong. "It does count for something, Rory. It counts for the fact that I'm not going to spend the rest of my life hating you." I gently pulled my hand free. "But it doesn't count for forgiveness. And it doesn't count for a second chance." I left her sitting in the coffee shop and drove home to my quiet house, my paid-off mortgage, and my plans for a future that belonged entirely to me. 6 months later, I was enrolled in the University of Maine's part-time law program, working toward the degree I'd abandoned years earlier. Patricia Hendricks had offered me a position as a paralegal with full tuition reimbursement, and I discovered that I genuinely enjoyed the work. Donnie still stopped by regularly with beer and gossip. According to the local network, Rory had closed Prestige Design Solutions and taken a job with a larger firm in Portland. Evan had disappeared entirely, presumably to start over somewhere his reputation hadn't preceded him. I didn't think about either of them very often. Instead, I thought about contracts and case law, about evidence and procedure, about the satisfaction of building an airtight argument from scattered facts and careful research. I thought about the difference between being underestimated and being overlooked, and how both could be advantages if you knew how to use them. Most of all, I thought about the future. My future, built on a foundation of truth instead of lies, owned entirely by the man who'd earned it. One evening in late spring, I was working in my garden when Mrs. Patterson from the law library stopped by. She was walking her dog and had seen me outside. "Tanner, I heard you're back in school. That's wonderful." "Thank you, Mrs. Patterson. I'm enjoying it more than I expected. And I heard about your divorce case. Quite impressive from what people say. I just presented the facts." She smiled. "Sometimes that's all it takes. You know, in all my years working with legal research, I've learned that the most dangerous opponents aren't the ones who shout the loudest or spend the most money. No. They're the ones who do their homework." After she left, I sat on my front porch as the sun set, thinking about homework and preparation, about patience and justice, about the quiet satisfaction of a job well done. Somewhere across town, Rory was probably getting ready for another day at her new job, working for someone else, rebuilding a career that would never quite reach the heights she'd planned with Evan. Somewhere else, Evan was probably still trying to explain to potential employers why his last business partnership had ended so spectacularly. But I wasn't thinking about them anymore. I was thinking about tomorrow's classes, about the case law I needed to review, about the career I was building one careful step at a time. I was thinking about the future, and for the first time in years, it looked exactly like what I wanted it to be. The ledger was balanced, the accounts were settled, and Tanner Jossman was finally completely free.